Okay,
Yep.
great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 3. We're going to start off with the design lecture first this time. So we're going to talk about typography and web design. And as you can see, we labeled the fonts on the slide today. So the week 3 text is actually in Carla, and the title typography and web design is in Source Serif Pro. So starting off with some announcements. If you don't know already, which you probably should, homework and lab 2 are both due right now. So like before this lecture at 7 p.m. We greatly apologize for the issues with the portal being down. Unfortunately, we don't anticipate the portal being up anytime soon because the business that ran the server actually shut down. So we're gonna try and just have all of the assignments posted on Piazza for now, and then submissions will be through a Google form, which is also posted on Piazza. Homework and lab 3 will be released after lecture today, and homework as usual will be due next Tuesday at 7 p.m. before lecture, and then lab will be due this Friday at midnight. So the deadlines for homework and lab 3 will be the same as usual, but just for the sake of the portal being down this week, homework and lab 2 will be due or is due on Tuesday before this lecture. So on Thursday, we're going to have a Figma lab. This is a very highly interactive Figma lab. So it's highly recommended that you come to section. Otherwise, if you've never used Figma before and you don't come to section, you'll probably be very lost with how Figma works. So we really, really strongly recommend that you come to section this Thursday. And also I recommend having Figma set up before lab as well, so we can minimize the time that's spent to prep your computer with like Figma and everything. And again, Figma is super important because it's going to be used for the project, our midterm project, which will be released next week, and more information will come soon for that. So someone asked if they can submit homework in lab 2 tonight, or is that too late? I think honestly, because we've been facing so many issues with the portal this week, we'll be a lot more lenient on the deadline. So if you submitted, or if you didn't submit homework in lab 2 before this lecture, I think we'll go easy on the scores, but just for this week, since we're going back to the usual deadlines after this lecture. And as always, our anonymous feedback form is located at the bottom of the slide. And then again, please feel free to add songs to our playlist. It's at that link on the slide as well. Okay, so here you can see a CSS cheat sheet that one of our former TA/instructor created. This will be posted on Piazza right after this lecture. So I think this will be a really great resource for you guys. I feel like it really encompasses a lot of what we taught in our previous CSS lecture, and it'll also give some details about like HTML layouts and formatting and whatnot. So I think this cheat sheet will be really useful, and it will be posted after class today. So why is typography important? Because it's very hard to read this, so the yellow font right there, or this, which is in a more like handwriting scripty font, or even this, which I'm not sure if you guys can see, but there's a very tiny font size in between the two thises, and then finally this. So type is a beautiful group of letters, not a group of beautiful letters. This quote is from Matthew Cater. So yeah, basically this means that you kind of think about typography not in the sense of like individual like words and letters and like individual font styles, but all of them at once. So it's a very like cohesive structure that you have to think about when it comes to typography. It's not really about like the individual like letters that you're basically creating on the page. So typography evokes the personality or character of a website. So as you can see on the right side here, there's a GIF of the Slack website. And as you can see, they really utilize typography a lot. Like they have the title and the headings as like a serif font. And then the like paragraph text, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's a sans serif font. So I don't know if I said serif for the title, but the title is serif and then the paragraph is sans serif. So as you can see, they really utilize typography and they try to make like the title stand out a lot more against the paragraph text. So it really like defines the personality and character of a website. Branding can showcase a variety of emotions through type. So here we have another example of how like typography really contributes to the branding of a company. So here on the right side, you can see a lot of different examples of different like font styles and like font weights, etc. And it really like shows like a different, I guess, like feeling, like it really brings out a different emotion, like whenever you see these different like types of, I guess, like fonts. So be really aware of like how typography can sort of define like what the user feels when they look at a specific like infographic or a website or anything that has fonts in it. So often more than 80% of the information is expressed as pure text. So here is an example of a Medium article. And you can see that like Medium articles are like mainly text, right? So you can see that there's like a title at the top and then the subtitle below it. And then they have like a user like tag underneath that. And most of the article is basically formatted in terms of headings and paragraph text. So it's really important that like you pay attention to the typography you use, because a lot of the times like 80% of the information you use will be in terms of pure text. And then finally, typography can be effectively summarized in terms of the font size, the font weight, and the font color. So on the right side, you can see that there's like another example here where we use like the title. It has like a bigger font weight. And then underneath that, we have like smaller font sizes, but not only that, like the color has changed too. So the color is a bit lighter than the title text. And then the paragraph below that, it has like sort of a heavier gray color. So all of these like different text elements here have like a different color to them. And they also utilize like different font weights as well. And that really like communicates to the user that like these are 3 different blocks of text to pay attention to. So how do we make typography work? So you may or may not have noticed that I mentioned serif fonts and sans serif fonts earlier. So serif fonts are basically fonts that have like a sort of like a flick or a line where the letter forms terminate. So the right side has an example of a serif font. So you can see that there's like, we call it like a flick at the end. So like the B's and the D's, like it's pretty clear that they have like sort of like a line at the top and the bottom of like where the, I guess the back of the letter is. So that's a serif font. And generally they give a more classy and formal feeling to the text that you're reading. Some examples of this include Times New Roman, which I'm sure you guys have used for like a lot of your essays in high school and stuff. And a lot of default fonts that you see in the browser when you don't apply CSS will be serif fonts. On the other hand, we have sans serif fonts. So sans means without in French. So basically sans serif means without the flick. So on the left side, you can see an example of a sans serif font. So as you can see, like if you compare the serif and the sans serif fonts, this one does not have a flick. So it's a lot smoother and a lot more rounder in comparison to the serif fonts. So sans serif fonts generally give a more like modern feel. For example, if you go to like a very like high-end like clothing site or like even like technology sites, they generally use sans serif fonts because it has more of a modern like technological feel. And some examples of this include Arial, Helvetica, New, and Carla. In general, serif fonts are usually easier to read in printed works rather than sans serif fonts. So that's why I feel like serif fonts are more associated with like classy and formal, whereas sans serif is more modern because I feel like serif is more prevalent in like newspapers and stuff like that, whereas sans serif is more commonly used on like websites and like technology products. So yeah, kind of going over like what I just said in the previous slide, like this is an example of like how serif and sans serif fonts are used. So serif fonts are more classy and reserved. So you can see here, like on the Vogue website, they use a lot of serif fonts. So it communicates more of like a classy feel to it. Whereas on the right side, Nike uses a sans serif font. So that communicates more like modern, like technical feelings. So yeah, these are like the main two categories of fonts. So try to use them to like convey like a certain like feeling to your website. And then again, here are more examples. So on the left side, you can see that serif is better for like text heavy content, just because it's mainly used in like newspapers and stuff traditionally. So in a lot of like online articles, you'll see that the main body of the text is composed of serif fonts. On the other hand, sans serif is usually used for more like image heavy content. So here you can see that there's like a lot of space in between the text and the image. And even the text itself, there's not that much content there, so they prefer to use sans serif. Okay, moving on to sort of like the weights when it comes to fonts. So at the top, there's like the title, which is in bolded weight. And we kind of like created these rectangles on the side to convey like the different blocks of the text and like what attracts more attention to the user. So like obviously the text at the very top, which is the title, it's in bolded weight, so it attracts the most attention. On the other hand, we have like the medium heading underneath, which is also bolded, but not as much. So it's like a medium weight. So it conveys like a sort of like inferior, like, I guess it grabs like less attention than the bolded title at the top. And then finally, we have the paragraph text, which uses like light font. So that generally attracts the least attention from the user. So by using all of these three different font weights, we can effectively, I guess, create like a sort of hierarchy and basically kind of compartmentalize all of our different like text that we have on our website into different blocks. So generally, we try to use only 2 to 3 fonts per website. And the reason for this is because we don't want our website to be heavily cluttered with a lot of different fonts. So when we get to like the midterm project, when you get like checked off by our TAs and instructors, oftentimes we'll tell you like, oh, you're using too many fonts, or like it's very messy, like the fonts that you chose, because you're kind of like using too many fonts, and generally like only 2 to 3 fonts will suffice for what you're trying to convey. So this is kind of like a rule that I always follow whenever I'm like designing a website or a prototype. You shouldn't have more than 2 to 3 fonts. So because usually you have like a title and a heading and then paragraph text, and then maybe like some sort of like font style they use for like buttons and stuff. So that kind of adds up to only like 2 to 3 fonts overall. So just try not to go over 2 to 3 fonts for your website. Type is not an exact science. It is aligned when it feels aligned. So I know we went over like a lot of rules and stuff so far, but in general, like typography is what you feel like it should be. So for example, here we have like a lot of different like grid systems that people tend to use for organizing text on their page. So on the left side, there's like a square grid. So all of the, I guess, contents of the page align to a specific side of a square. So you're essentially like breaking down the page into smaller squares, and then you're aligning all of the text to the sides of the squares. On the other hand, you might use like a 12-column layout, which means that you're dividing the page into 12 columns, like vertically, and then you align all of the text to the side of a column. And then the last example is a 5-column grid. So this is a lot more spaced out, and you tend to use this for more like image heavy content, or I guess pages where you have a lot less text. So again, like you try to align the text to the edges of one of the 5 columns. So while grid systems can be useful, in real life, like you might just need to eyeball it. So as you can see here, like the bonjour text doesn't really align exactly with the paragraph text, and this commonly happens when you're using prototyping tools like Figma. Like you'll see that there's like a space at the insert, like on the left and the right side of the text. And so that makes it harder to like align exactly to the paragraph text below it. So sometimes we just like eyeball it and we like look at it and say like, oh, this isn't really exactly aligned with each other. And we just kind of like shift it so that it looks like it's aligned. So yeah, there's no like general rule that you have to follow, but like just go with what you think looks best on your website. Okay, so in terms of picking font styles to use, try to pick a font that has a lot of weights. So usually the more popular fonts have like a light, regular, medium, and bolded weight. And all of these weights combined equals a typeface. So generally try to pick a font that has a lot of weights because then you can use the same font style, but just change the weights whenever you want to create like a title or a heading or a paragraph text. And then some more like general guidelines that you can follow. Use line spacing to your advantage. So on the left side, we have like a shorter paragraph, and we generally recommend like 1.2 line spacing in between each line of the text. Whereas if there's a longer paragraph that you want to display on your website, we recommend using 1.5 line spacing. I think generally this is just to make it easier on the reader's eyes, because if you have like a lot of text and they're all very crammed into each other, it's going to be harder to read. So like the more text you have, the, I guess, bigger line spacing you should have in between the lines of text. And then in terms of text width, so if you're writing a smaller paragraph, try to use between 40 and 70 characters per line. So actually this goes for like all sizes of text. So you shouldn't have each line be too long. Otherwise it's going to take forever for someone to read each line, but you also don't want to make them too short so that like they'll only read like one word per line. So generally try to stay between 40 and 70 characters per line. Yeah, and in terms of contrast, so here we have two different like color schemes going on. So the left side is like black text on a white background, whereas the right side has white text on top of a green background. So this kind of shows like the contrast between thin and thick fonts. So generally thin fonts work better on darker backgrounds. Like on the right side, we have like white on basically a green background. And I don't know if you can tell, but like I think the top one looks better or feels more natural than the bottom green text, just because thin fonts generally work better on darker backgrounds and heavier font weights don't work as well. On the other hand, heavier font weights work better on a light background. So on the left side, you can see that like the top font is a bit harder to read because it's so light, whereas the bottom one, it's easier to read because it's like, it brings more contrast. Like the black is a lot easier to read on the light background. So yeah, I think in terms of like summarizing what's on the slide, like the top right is best if you're trying to go for darker backgrounds, and then the bottom left is best if you're trying to go for lighter backgrounds. Again, like don't nerd over typefaces, just pick one that like suits the best for your website. And then think of typography as like blocks. So it's not like individual letters that you're trying to design or style. It's the overall, like it's all of the different text together, like as a package that you're trying to design. And then don't try to like, I guess, stick too strictly with like grid systems. Sometimes you have to like eyeball with your eyes. And then again, like with the same mindset of like thinking of typography as like groups of letters rather than individual letters, hierarchy comes first. So you really want to convey like the title should be the one that is the most prominent, attracts the most attention, whereas the headings and subheadings, and then finally the paragraph text should correspondingly attract less attention. And then use contrast. So as I said in the slide right before this, like try to use heavier fonts or heavier font weights on lighter backgrounds, and then lighter font weights on colored or darker backgrounds. And then finally, try to fine tune with spacing. For example, like using 1.2 line spacing for smaller paragraphs and then 1.5 for larger paragraphs. And then stay between 40 and 70 characters per line. Okay, so we kind of covered like all of the general like guidelines and tips for how to structure fonts and how to, I guess, lay out different font weights and styles, but how do you end up choosing a font? So again, like I said, start with one typeface and try to choose a typeface that has multiple different font weights. So here we have Museo Sans Rounded, and as you can see, there's like numbers to the right of the name, starting from 100 all the way to 900. So 100 is the lightest font weight, and it goes all the way up to 900, which is the heaviest font weight. So Google Fonts is going to be one of your best friends when it comes to choosing a typeface. They allow you to kind of like try out different fonts and select different font weights so that you can see what it looks like real time. The next resource we have is typesample.com. And actually, I think this one merged with Typewolf. So if I click on this link right here, this is, I think, a blog that shows a lot of different font styles. And I think it's really cool because it kind of like allows you to test and sample each font, similar to what Google Fonts provides. And it kind of shows you like the most popular fonts that are currently like trending on Typewolf. So I think this is a really good resource if you want to look at like a blog that has more information about each font style. And then What Font is a really useful resource as well. I think I actually have this downloaded. So it's like a Google Chrome browser extension. So as you can see, like when I hover over like some of these fonts, it will tell you exactly what font style that is. So if you're like on a website and you are curious like what font styles they're using, you can just click on this extension in your browser and then just hover over the text and it'll tell you exactly what font style it is. So I don't know if you guys can see right here, but I'm hovering over like week 3 design, and that's the Google Sans font. And it also tells you like the font weight, which is really cool. So you know exactly what like font weight they're using. And then they tell you like a bunch of other information, such as the font size, the line height, and the color. So I think this is a really good resource, and I highly recommend that you download it into your Google Chrome browser. And as always, there are a lot of exceptions to the rules and guidelines that we covered. But I think in general, like try to communicate as much as possible through typography. And there's so many styles out there that you can experiment with. So I think the advice for you guys is to just like experiment as much as possible and try to be inspired as much as possible by the websites that you see out there. This is an example I think Howie put because he was like learning Korean at the time. And I think this is like a really good resource that people can use if they're curious about Korean Google fonts. So yeah, I think they have like a lot of information about like the font styles and then like the font weights and stuff. I think you also like hover over the fonts and see like the individual like pixels, which I think is really cool. It's a very stylized website, but yeah, if you're ever interested in like learning about how fonts are in Korean, this is like a really good resource. And then this is for, I think, Japanese typography. So similar to like the Google fonts for like Korean fonts, this is like all the font styles for Japanese fonts. I think this is actually a link to the Instagram page. And on their Instagram page, they have a lot of different like sort of abstract font styles that they make for like Japanese. So I think it's also like a really nice source of inspiration. And yeah, that is the end of the design lecture. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, if not, we can take a short break here before we jump into programming.
Hello.
Cool. So today we're going to go over box model and spacing for our programming lecture. So the topics that we'll cover are like a quick review on CSS selectors, and then we'll go into like what the box model is and how we use that in, I guess, in our websites and designs. And then we'll also do like a short intro to layouts. So some HTML reminders. We have all these different tags. Some special ones include head, and that's just like a special part of the HTML document. And it's like where we place information that's like important to our website and important for the browser to know, but maybe not necessarily for the user. So that's like the title or like the copyright page of the book. And then there's the body tag, and that's where all of our actual content goes. So everything that the user sees on the screen. And you can think of them as like chapters of a book. And then another special tag is header, which goes inside of the body. And it acts like just like a div, basically, but it has a very special meaning. And that's like the header of our page. And then some CSS reminders. I think these are like some common mistakes that we see. So color refers to the text color. Whereas if you want to set the background color, you have to use either background or background dash color to change the, I guess, background color. And then to change the font, either you can do it like the box on the right, where you say things like font size is 18 pixels, and then like font family, and then you like say Arial or like Times New Roman, things like that. And you can like have each of the properties like separate, or there's like a shorthand. And you can just say font is like 18 pixels and Arial, and they do the same thing. But make sure that for every like CSS rule you write, you have a semicolon at the end of the line. Otherwise, like things start getting messed up and you like might not see your CSS being applied. And then for hover effects, we use the pseudo selector hover, and just make sure that you don't put a space in between the colon and like the text, because then that doesn't work. So some examples really quickly. So here, when we use a comma in between, on the right side, if you look at the CSS, that's saying that we're applying this style to everything. So the H1s and then all the LI items. So it's like we're setting the font family for each of these tags to Arial. Whereas if we have a space in between, we're saying first we navigate to the first item, which is food list. And then like we look inside of that. So we go to all the list item tags inside of food list. And so those are the only ones that the blue color actually gets applied to. And then I guess like same thing here. Previously, we used it with the ID food list, but you can also do that with just like the tag, and it'll apply to everything for like all the tags that like match. And then here we used the class highlight. So it'll only select the ones with the highlight class inside of the unordered list. Whereas if you see like here in our H1, we also have the class highlight, it won't be selected because we're saying first we go into the unordered list and then we look for highlights. Yeah, that's what I just said, where it like doesn't get highlighted because it's not inside. And yeah, so moving on to the box model. So we have this analogy for the box model that I guess helps us explain how things work, and we use picture frames for them. So if we look at the picture frame, the content inside is the picture itself, right? And so in the box model, that's also just the content. That's like our text, our image, anything inside of like our divs. And then we have something called padding. So padding is the space between the picture and the picture frame. So like if you're fancy and you get something framed, you might want to add some like extra space around it so your picture is not like directly next to the frame. And I guess just like because the white space like emphasizes the picture more. And so we call that padding. And then there's the border. And in our picture frame analogy, that's the frame. But like if we're talking about HTML elements, like you can draw a border around your div. And then we have the margin, which only really matters when you have like multiple elements, right? So it's the spacing in between the picture frames, this orange area. And then so that's a summary of what it looks like and without the picture frames. Oh, someone asked if border is 0 by default. I don't know if it's 0, but border is typically like hidden by default. So you don't see it, so, but you can like set values. So again, with the box model, we have the content in green. That's like our actual content. The padding goes around it and it's like the space between the frame and the content. Then we have the frame, which is the border, and then the spacing between the different items, which is the margin. So here we have a JS bin that you can look at on your own later. But I think we go through like the same content through the slides. So here we have some text and it's like, there's no spacing, there's no visual hierarchy, right? Like we don't know what's more important. Is it the welcome to WDD or is it like the homework being released? And then also the background color and the text color are too close to each other. So it can be really difficult to read. So we can fix that. We can do something like this, where we apply the CSS. And if you notice, like we do things like setting the background color of our elements to white so that the like dark purple color of the font isn't like directly on the blue, which makes it hard to read. We can set a width so we can see that like the white spans longer than the text. And then we can say padding. So if you remember, padding is the like space between the border, which is this light blue line, and then the like content, which would be our text. So you see that there's like space around. So it's like not as squished. And then we have a border with a 10 pixel like width. So it's like a very thick border. And then the margin is the space in between the two elements. Oh yeah, so the content box is like the text and we were able to set the width for it. The padding is the space around it. The border is like the outline of the content. And it also outlines the padding. And then the margin is like the space that actually goes between everything. So here we like previously we would just set the padding values to like the same thing, right? So it was always like 15 pixels around everything. But like in reality, you can set all these different values separately. So here we were able to set like the width to 512 and the height to 128 pixels. And that's like a very standard size. And then we're able to set each of the padding separately. So here, it's all 16, but we could say like 16 and then like 32. So it'll like, I guess, place your content like relatively different within the border based on like how much padding you have on each side. And then you can do the same thing with margin. So like maybe you want some more space on the left and the right versus like the top and the bottom. So yeah, here's another example of like different padding on different sides. So you can see that like there's not a lot of padding on the top, but there's a lot of padding underneath our content. So like the blue area is much larger underneath, and then also on the left is much larger. So if you look at like the actual image of what it would look like on the bottom, the text is like kind of skewed to the right because of the way we like padded it. And then we can do the same thing with margins. So some of the units that you commonly use to, I guess, like lay out these different items, or like that we use in our box model, include pixels. And these are probably what you think of most often. And they're the tiny squares that make up your screen. So 100 pixels is approximately an inch, or like slightly less than an inch. But it's like a size that can also vary. So pixels are really good for like cases when you know the exact size of something. So if you think like on Medium, it's like that text is always like centered, right? And the width of that text doesn't really vary. They just give you more like padding on the sides. So it's like when you know that you don't want the size of this item to scale as you resize the page. And then there's percents. So percents depend on like the size of your parent element. So here, if we have like an outer div and then an inner div, we can set our inner div's width to like 50% of the outer div. That way, like we'll be able to, I guess, control it without like explicitly setting a value. And then like also the outer div's width can be like a percentage of its parent, which might be like the body. And then there's something called points. So typically you like think of points when you think of fonts, but physically it's 1/72 of an inch, but it can like be kind of inconsistent across like devices. So usually we stick with pixels or EM. And then we can go to an introduction of layouts. So here we have an example, and this is like, I guess we're thinking about design more with this example, but you can see that like we have this purple background, and then all of our content is in like this white square in the center. And there's like some padding on either side and on the top and the bottom. And then we have like our header also separated from our paragraph. So there's like margin space in between them. And then the header also has like a background, and that really helps divide all of our content to be very clear. So yeah, like if we go through our thought process, like while we're designing this, we want the main content, which is the area inside the white container, to always be centered on the page. And then we're able to set like a value from the top, which here it's like 100 pixels. But then like certain things that you should consider when you're, I guess, laying out the page is that, do you want the content to be a set width? So something like 600 pixels, or a percent like 50. So a problem with percentages is that like as we resize our websites or our like applications, or if we move from like desktop to mobile, 50% on a phone screen when you're holding it like vertically is really, really small. So sometimes a pixel might be more useful in that case. But other times, like if you want the image to like fit and not like extend way past your phone, right? Like maybe then you would want to use a percentage. So now taking a look at the code for it, we want to center our white content. So what we can do for that is we use something called, not called, but we use the margin, and we can set it to auto, and that'll automatically like center our div as long as we have like a set width for it. So here we set it to like 600, and then we say margin auto, or we could say like margin left, margin right, which like I guess is the more complicated way to say it. And then we can also set like a custom margin top value, and that will do that thing where we like center our white div inside of the purple like container. And then right now, if you remember like from the first homework or from like labs and things like that, by default, a lot of our elements like stack, right? So they go from like the top of the page, and then they're just like one after another, going down the page. And then a lot of HTML elements like div will span as wide as it can across the page. But then each new div goes on its own line. So sometimes we want things to be in columns, right? Like we want things to be able to be side by side, like how we have on this slide. Like it makes more sense visually for certain types of items. So how can we do that? We use a property called display, and this is a CSS property. And so we have, like, I guess 3 values that display tends to take on. There's block, where everything goes on its own line. And this is what like we see for a lot of elements, right? No matter how wide it is, it'll go on to the next line, even if it could fit next to our old element or like the element before it. And then with block elements, it's really nice because we can use things like margin and padding to space them out. And examples of block elements include like our divs, our headers, our paragraph tags, and these are like by default. So then we can like, as you can see, we can like change the display property to, I guess, allow it to do different things. On the other side, like the opposite of display block, we have display inline. And that's where everything is on the same line. So like the elements are only as long as the content inside of it is. So like if we have a really long sentence, it might span the entire like width of our page, right? But if we have like a 3-word sentence, our like inline displayed element will really like be really short. So with inline elements, we have this problem of where it doesn't respect the margin and the padding. So like we can't really set those values. And this is like typically seen for things like span or our like link tags with A. And then if you just have like text. So there's this like nice middle ground, which is display inline block, which takes like the nice properties from both display block and display inline. And it like combines them. So we can have things that go on the same line as long as they fit, and we'll be able to use margin and padding. So other things, I guess like for a bit more layout abilities, we can use display alongside with float. So we can say display inline block for our divs, and that will allow them to be like placed onto the same line, right? And then we can say float left. So it'll move everything to the left. So thinking about layouts. So I guess like in preparation for creating wireframes with Figma, or like even designing how you want to lay out your own website, we can think of a page as building blocks being put together. So here we have the free and for sale page on Facebook. And if we divide this up into the different building blocks that make them, we'll see that the header that goes along the top of the page is really like its own element. It's very separate from the rest of the content on the page, right? Because it's something that like we want to be able to access from anywhere. And a lot of the times it's like fixed to the top of the page. So even if you scroll down, like you'll always be able to get back to or you'll always be able to access the navigation. And then we have the main content, which is here in the yellow. And usually this container of content has a set width. So it'll be like, it only takes up like 800 pixels of your screen or something like that. And then it's usually centered for like ease of reading, I guess. So if we take a look at specifically what was in the main content, we can also separate these out into more containers. So here we have the column on the left, and this is like additional navigation, but it's like for this own like page, I guess. And it also contains things like the title, there's like links, there's search bar, and it's like its own section of the page, right? And then we have the right column, and that's where most of the like information is. So, and then we can continue breaking this down even more. If we take a look at only the right column, we'll see that we have multiple rows. So one of our rows is like the header image. And then we have another row where we have things like the actual posts in the feed. And then this is also made up of more columns and rows. And you can like go all the way down to a very low level until you have like only text or only images to like, I guess, make up your entire website layout. So here is like I guess, like overall visual example of what it looks like. But this is just really important to keep in mind as you continue like thinking about how you want to lay out your pages as we learn more about how to position things and lay out different elements. Like it's important to consider how these blocks can be divided into different divs. For you, like as the programmer, to like be able to keep track of everything, but also like visually for the user to be able to easily navigate through things. And then I guess we can go over a quick example or like demo of how to use Chrome DevTools. And some of you might already know what this is, but it's like when you inspect element of a page. I think like in middle school, sometimes we would like inspect element on our grades and like change the numbers, like very temporarily. So, okay, I skipped a slide. But Chrome DevTools are the best way to debug and figure out what's going on with your code. So if you've been to office hours and you had like a problem and you can't really figure it out by reading the code, often a TA will ask you to like open your page up in a browser and then inspect elements so that we can figure out what's going on with like each section. And it's the best in Chrome. It's okay in Firefox, but it's not that great in other browsers, which is why we typically recommend that you use Chrome when you're working on homework for this class. And how we get to it, you can either right click with your mouse and then press inspect element, or you could do like Control or Command Shift I think F12 also opens it up. But yeah, it'll like have this pop up that'll show up on your page. Sometimes it'll be on the bottom, sometimes it'll be on like the right side. It just depends on like, I guess, your settings. But some different things that you might see is this navigation bar, I guess, at the top. And to see the HTML and CSS for your page, make sure you're on the Elements tab. Things like console we'll talk about later, but that's where you'll be able to like try out like different JavaScript. And then so inside of Elements, that's where all your HTML is. So it'll be like exactly what your code looks like. And then you can click on the arrows, the gray arrows on the left side to like toggle the nested elements inside. So if we like close it, then you'll just see like head and body. And then on the right side, or sometimes like underneath, depending on how your thing is laid out, you'll see the corresponding CSS for the HTML element that you've clicked on. So here we see like there's a gray highlight over the image tag. So like we're clicking on that and then we'll see all the CSS actually being applied to it. So here we can see that its width is being set to 25%. And then if you want to like test out different settings or like different rules or values for your CSS, you can double click on that and then modify the numbers or like the values directly in your browser. But these are very like temporary changes, just like for you to help debug what's going wrong. Yeah, so some things you can do, you can hover over your HTML tag, and then you'll see that like on the page, it'll highlight the like box model. So it'll show you like the padding, the margin, it's within the height. If you click on the HTML tags in the inspect element like console, you'll see the CSS that's being applied to it. If you click on one of the CSS properties or values, you can edit it. And then if you like click in the rules area, you can also like add new ones. And then so I guess I could demo it really quickly. If we just go to like Google, if you right click, there's like the inspect. So there's also like you can test different sizes. So if you want like to look at what it would look like on mobile versus like tablet or your laptop, Google is a lot more complicated than like a basic website, but you can see like we have our head tags and our body. And if we click on like body, we can see that there's different elements inside, and you can see like how they divided their page into like the navigation, and then there's like the Google logo, and then the search bar, and then they should have like a footer all the way at the bottom. And then we can see like the CSS being applied to. So they have like display flex, which we'll learn about later. They have like their items that are aligned to the center. But if we like take that off, you'll see that the navigation text like moves to the top. So if we like toggle that, and then you'll see like their padding. And yeah, so you can take a look at like any website that you use, and you'll be able to see their HTML and CSS, but it might look like a bit more complicated than what you might write. So some common patterns in layouts for page. There's like the main container that typically holds everything, and then like all your content for the page. And then like the header might be a separate block on its own, since it's like kind of different from the main content. And then like you can have different columns of content as divs. And then these columns have different components like links to your other parts of the page. It could have text, it could have like a search bar, or like it could have the different posts, right? If you think about Facebook. And then these columns can be placed next to each other, and then you'll form different rows. Or they're placed into a row, but you can have like multiple rows on a page. And then so basically when you're like building out a page, we start from like really simple components. It might just be like images and text, and then you like put them together in rows and columns to form really complex layouts. Yeah, so layouts aren't like a super complicated thing. It's just a bunch of like tiny blocks that you put together until it's like a well-designed page. And then I guess some like vocabulary components are how like web developers in industry structure their things. And the content is divided into like small building blocks by themselves. So like if we think about a nav bar, we have like the logo and then the link, but like together this might make like a navigation component. And then so you have these like larger blocks that you can use throughout your page. And then also, I guess like it's really important to remember that you can start from really simple components, and just like put them in rows and columns in different ways. And then you'll be able to get really like complex layouts, and like basically 90%, probably more websites are like created like this. Are there any questions? If there's no questions, I guess some reminders. Homework and lab will be released hopefully tonight. We've like created this temporary portal on Notion, so you should be able to have access to all of those files. That's also where we have like the links to the lecture slides, and then our YouTube videos. And then yeah, lab is back to being due on Friday, and then homework will be due Tuesday. If there's no questions, then that's all we have for tonight. See you next week.